Hey, it's Shabes. Cartoon Brew released an entry in their Animation That Changed Me series, this one featuring Peter Chung, who was the original creator and director of Aeon Flux, and directed a segment from The Animatrix. He also might be the reason the Walt Disney Company licensed and dubbed most of the Ghibli films? That's mostly conjecture on my part. In fact, it's probably almost entirely conjecture on my part, but I'll circle back to that later. In this article, he's talking about Space Cobra, and I thought it was so darn fascinating I had to discuss it. Chung had been working at Disney Studios as an animator, but ultimately he knew he wanted to be a director, even if he didn't quite know what that meant yet. He says Space Cobra was the first time it became clear to him what a director does, and how it is distinct from animation. Naturally, I latched onto this immediately as a huge Dezaki fan, but Chung begins to paint an interesting divide between Japanese animation like Dezaki's and American animation like Disney's.
I find that with a lot of American animation, there's this real terror of being boring. So they're constantly having to entertain you at every moment. They're constantly having to be active.
There's an emphasis on activity, motion, animation. Chung says many young animators tend to focus on how good the animation is, even if the direction itself is mediocre or indifferent. To me, this seems indicative of the school of thought around full animation being equated to good animation.
It's a mortal sin in Disney-style classical animation to make your audience think that they're looking at a drawing. You're trying to hide the fact that the characters are made of drawings at all times.
So then, what other director is more well known for animation that looks like drawings than the one whose signature technique is turning the animation into a drawing?
Dezaki would be constantly surprising me. He was able to do all the things that I think animators are trying to do through their animation, but he was doing it through the storyboard.
To my knowledge, Dezaki was never an animation student. He developed all of his talents at Mushi Production, the studio that proliferated limited animation in Japan, which would go on to broadly define television anime to this day. Chung happened to work in Japan during the 90s, and in speaking to other professionals in the industry there,
all the directors, every single one without exception, cited Dezaki as their inspiration. He really, I think, had a lot to do with what we identify as the Japanese animation style of directing.
This is certainly not the case for all Japanese anime, specifically movies. Chung points out certain anime directors that are much more reliant on quote-unquote good animation, like Otomo, Oshii, and Satoshi Kon, and who else but Hayao Miyazaki. While I can understand any qualms fans might have had with Disney's distribution of Ghibli films, at the very least, it probably earned Miyazaki that Oscar for Best Animated Feature, before Disney themselves would ever earn it, which did contribute to anime's prominence in the West. And that win probably had to do in part with Miyazaki's #1 cheerleader, John Lassetter. He touts himself as quite the OG Miyazaki fan, meeting him for the first time only 2 years after Cagliostro came out in 1981. Now, I don't mean to take any of that away, but Chung happens to mention,
the first time John Lasseter saw Miyazaki's animation was when I brought some VHS tapes to Disney Studios and showed a lot of the guys Miyazaki films for the first time. That was the first exposure they had.
Now, Chung might be misremembering things, and those two events aren't actually related, and I don't know if it necessarily brought about the deal itself. Disney would gain the rights to distribute the Ghibli films in 1996, and it was likely just another one of their earlier, if you can't beat 'em, join 'em tactics. But if it is true, it's wild to me how Chung could have indirectly impacted the anime industry by just showing these animators some anime, though apparently they didn't quite resonate with much else.
When I was at Disney Studios, I was excited about a lot of Japanese animation that I was seeing, and I tried to share it with some of the American animators, and for the most part, they just did not respond. The only one that they responded to was Miyazaki.
Gee, I wonder why! Could it be because they saw their approach to animation reflected in Miyazaki's films?
Beginning of this, you see May, the little girl, and her sister running around the house, and they're doing the same thing. But you can see how vastly different they are. And it says right away what the age of each character, only, and not by what they're saying, but by the actions.
After all, his films stem from his upbringing at Toei Doga back in the 60s. which, like Disney, focused more on full animation. I'm starting to see Hayao Miyazaki and Osamu Dezaki representing these two schools of thought for Japanese animation, almost like rivals. And like a good rivalry, it's not about which approach is right or wrong. Anyway, Steven linked me a forum thread that Chung participated in when I told him about this video, so now I gotta go diving into that. Both of them are linked in the description, but I gotta head out. Yo, peace.